Very unforgiving. There we go.
Here we go. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Let me pull up the right tabs here because I have the all-time Premier League table open. Okay, we're good. So yeah, I'll just leave a pause for ad read somewhere. Probably once we get maybe once we get to past the play-in games.
We could do it as a break in between the Eastern and Western conferences.
Yeah, we could just do that, run up to the East, and do ad read run up the West. Okay, we'll go that way, and we'll kick it off in 3, 2, and 1. Welcome, everyone, to a special Friday morning episode of the USL show. I am Pony, and because it is 9 a.m., I apologize in advance if I yawn at some point during this podcast, but that's why it is. Joining me today is Ryan. How are you doing?
Doing well, Pony. It's kind of pouring down rain, but happy here in Wilmington. But I'm happy I was able to get the lawn mowed earlier this morning. Sorry to wake you this early for talking USL power rankings, a mid-season power rankings dream, or power at nights dream, if you will.
Yep, and it's just the two of us, and that means we're going to be talking numbers because the other guys, I'm not sure I'd love to sit in on this one. But if you guys know, we have our two ranking systems that we use to project playoffs and how good teams are. And since the season is basically halfway over for all the teams, we figure it's a good time to stop, catch up, and see what the numbers say are the best teams, not necessarily just what the standings say. Because as we know, those are not always the most reliable given games in hand and some odd shenanigans that seem to happen. So I'm going to throw it over to Ryan, and he'll talk about briefly his ranking methodology, how it works, and give a little brief background so we don't just start spewing a bunch of numbers without you guys knowing anything about why they exist. So Ryan, take it away.
Awesome. So my ranking system has been the ELO rating system. It's similar to what has been used for calculating the strengths of world football teams. I haven't been as much a fan of the FIFA rankings, and the FIFA rankings themselves has actually moved over towards what the ELO rating system is. But basically, it assigns teams a rating at the start of the year. We give them the average rating of an 1100 rating. And then by taking into consideration of the weight of the match, obviously a regular season game would have less weight than a playoff or a cup final. The ratings of both teams involved, the result, the expected result of the game, and the goal difference, which has been key. It calculates a change in ratings for each teams to go forth across the season. I've been doing the ELO ratings since 2014, but I've also backtracked and have done all the ratings of USL from 2011 up to this year. So I have a pretty decent set of historical data to build off upon and talk about each team's realistic chance of making the playoffs given a certain rating that they have based off of what teams have done in previous seasons. A few disclaimers is that the ELO ratings are heavily influenced by the goal differential in games. So if a team is outscoring their opponents a lot, like Phoenix has been this year, they're more likely to see their ratings climb quickly in the table, or basically in the power rankings. And also of note, all these teams of previous seasons, everything from 2017 to 2011, have played fewer games in their regular season than what USL teams are currently playing. So 2018 and 2019 have both had 34 match seasons. Everything else prior to that has been around 30 match seasons, 28 to I think as few as 24 match seasons. So the teams now today would likely be rated highly or better than the teams of previous seasons just for having more games played. But that's basically a basic overview. It helps us just kind of give us an expected result of the game and provide at least historical context and data for these teams. Pony, would you like to talk about your system?
Sure. Unlike yours, which kind of relies on goal differential home and away, mine completely ignores all those. If a team wins 1-0 or 8-0, it's not going to really affect too much either way. Mine is basically based on strength of schedule. What I do is each team gains so many points per game, and I look back and see what their average opponent has gained per game. Using that ratio, for example, I compare it to to each of their remaining games of the season. For example, if you gain 1.5 points per match on average, and your past opponent has gained 1.4 games per match on average, I'll look at that. I'll look ahead. If your next opponent gains only 1 point per game, you're probably going to do better than your 1.5. So you'll be projected to gain more than 1.5 for that opponent. If your next opponent gains 2 points per game, that's a better opponent than your past average opponent. So you will gain less than your 1.5 projected for the next game. This can end with situations where it's not always supposed to be 3 points combined per game that teams will gain. So maybe you'll have a game where Team A is supposed to gain 1.6 points and Team B will gain 1.1 points. The biggest weakness of mine is sample size, for one. As there's a small amount of games, each individual opponent will greatly impact your past average opponent. At the same time, teams that are very good and very bad mess with this formula. For the teams at the bottom of the table, almost every team is expected to gain 3 points per game. So if you lose that game or draw that game, that will greatly mess with your projection for the rest of the season. And we're still at the point where a team could greatly swing projected points just based on a single match, because 17 is a pretty good amount of games. But then let's say you play a Phoenix or you play a Hartford, that's going to really mess with your average opponent. So it's a bit swingy, but this is a very historically strong way of estimating at least who's going to be in the playoffs. Late July for the last 2 seasons, this is called 15 of 16 playoff teams correctly. Granted, didn't get all the seeds correct. But some of them have been off by 3 or 4 seeds, but it does a very good job about identifying who is good and who is bad. Of course, things could always change that, like injury to or anything else. But overall, it's just a method of comparing how good you have done against how good your future opponents are going to be. And from there, spitting out a projection of how many points you should have at the end of the season. So with a little bit of methodology to all this madness squared away, trying to hopefully people followed that to a decent extent. But if not, here come our projected standings. I'm sure some people just fast forwarded to this point either way. But we're going to start with the East and work from 18th all the way up to our projected winners. And because I think Ryan has it off on a tab over, he could kick it off with his 18th team first.
So my 18th team, I really have like a grouping of like 3 down at the bottom, but currently in 18th is Birmingham Legion.
Yeah, mine is, I think, probably about 5 teams my ratings consider bad, but my 18th team is Hartford this season, who I project to end up with only 23 points right now. I think that's underprojecting them. I think they're better than that, but it is what it is, and they need to step it up.
Yeah, I have Hartford currently as my 17th team, but they've gone this previous week, they've gone back and forth with Birmingham for this bottom spot, and I don't think they'll be as bad as the team who's currently in last of the Western Conference. They definitely need to step it up. There's like a grouping of like 5 teams, or my bottom 5, so 14 through 18, are definitely, I think, are like considered the bad sides of the Eastern Conference.
Right. And my 17th team, who has kind of been surprising they've been this low to me, is Memphis.
Yeah, it's weird for the expansion side. They played Orlando City tough in the Open Cup, but it seems like it's just kind of a weird team to be this low.
Right. And to me, one above them in 16th is another team I don't think we thought would be this low in Swope Park, who is actually tied for 15th, but they lose on tie breaks, which for me is 10th of a point.
Yeah, my 16th place team is Atlanta United 2, another MLS 2 side, with Swope Park Rangers coming in 15th for those 2 spots.
Right. And my 15th place team that we're talking about, I said is tied with Swope Park, is Birmingham, another team that to me is surprising to be this low. I think we all had them as one of the better chances for an expansion team to make a splash.
Yeah, I had thought that like Chandler Hoffman has done pretty well with Real Monarchs in previous seasons, that he'd help improve with Birmingham, but I guess it shows that you can't just be the one player.
Yep. And moving up for me in 14th is a team that you've already mentioned, Atlanta United 2.
Yeah, I mean, my 14th place side is Memphis, and this really closes out these 5 teams. I think we are all in agreement are the bottom barrel teams for the Eastern Conference, like the clear bad teams of the East.
Right. I think we have the same 5, just muddled around in different orders. But yeah, I think these are the 5 that you don't want to say have no playoff shot, but I would solidly bet against any of these teams being able to make a run unless something miraculous happens.
Yeah, I mean, I've even classified this as like I've split my conference up into 3 tiers, and we're about to enter this middle tier. But yeah, these 5 teams they need something miraculous to turn around their season. But up into 13th place, I have Bethlehem Steel, who just lost last night to the Pittsburgh Riverhounds.
Right. My 13th team was a team that seems to be turning around a little bit in Charlotte, who's starting to make a bit of a run. We'll see if it could be sustained, but they're looking better.
Yeah, they are trending upwards, and I think the change at the helm from sacking McGinnis to moving back to Jeffries, I think that has definitely helped improve the side. It almost makes you wonder why they didn't just stick with Jeffries from the get-go.
Yeah, what a turnaround just a coach could make. And for me, 12th is Bethlehem Steel, who you had already mentioned is your 13th. So I'm going to make a guess of who your 12th might be.
Charlotte Independence.
Yeah. See, for me, Bethlehem's actually a bit ahead of Charlotte. They're projected to finish more than a game ahead of them.
Yeah, for this, I think Charlotte and Bethlehem they've gone back and forth. Charlotte currently has a 1071 rating with Bethlehem at a 1068. In fact, it was Charlotte's draw last night against North Carolina FC that jumped them up to that 1071 rating, and Bethlehem's loss that dropped them down to that 1068 rating. So it was the results of last night that truly impacted. Just these teams go back and forth, and I honestly think they'll finish right next to each other this year in the table.
Yeah. And moving up to 11th, the last team for me that's not going to be in the playoffs is probably, despite not being in the playoffs, one of the biggest surprises of the season, and that is Loudoun United.
I'm in agreement here. They're my 11th place team in my power rankings. They're actually, and across the entire league, the most narrowly consistent team that their range between their highest and lowest is the smallest of any team. So they've been incredibly consistent. And I remember during our team draft at the start of the year, they were begrudgingly picked last out of it. It's like, oh, they're not going to do anything. And they've been one of the more solid teams. I mean, if they can turn around results, they could very easily find themselves in a play-in spot. But it's definitely a far cry from us saying they're going to be the worst team in the Eastern Conference this year.
Well, also, when we drafted, they didn't have a full team. They didn't even have 11 players signed. So when you have 11 players signed that shortly before the season starts, I don't think anyone expects you to have a good team.
But yeah, I mean, here they are. It's weird for mine. They're in their own island. Like, they're not quite as low as Charlotte, but they're not as close to the top 10, which we'll eventually get into for these play-in games. And so it's just like a weird team that I think will remain in the bubble unless they start turning around. They're more likely to finish in the playoffs than to be truly anything lower than 12th, I'll say.
I'd say I'd go the other way. I think because, I mean, Charlotte's kind of turning it on. Bethlehem could do something. Birmingham as well. Park, I think, could all suddenly figure stuff out. But I wouldn't be shocked if they made the playoffs, which 3 months ago I would have laughed at if you told me it.
I mean, prior to the season, I would have asked, how could 7 players become a playoff team in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, so I want to just really quickly run back through our teams out of the playoffs before we get into it.
Yeah, sure.
Summarize.
So
I'll running up from 18th to 18th to 11th. I have 18th Hartford, 17th Memphis, 16th Swope, 15th Birmingham, 14th Atlanta, 13 Charlotte, 12 Bethlehem, and 11 is Loudoun.
In 18th, I have Birmingham, and 17th, I have Hartford, and 16th, I have Atlanta United 2, and 15th is Swope Park, and 14th is Memphis, 13th is Bethlehem, 12th is Charlotte, and